Hey there, friend! So today I am reviewing These Feathered Flames by Alexandra Overy. This actually came in the Ascend the Throne bookish box that I bought recently, and I like royalty and I like magic, and this book has both. So for the brief overview of kind of what happens in the book, we follow two twin sisters whose names are a little hard for me to pronounce, so I'm just going to kind of stick to their titles. Very young, I believe at the age of 8, they go through this ritual to see who will become the next Firebird, which is this mystical kind of entity that lives in a person and kind of gets passed along. But it also upholds the balance of magic. So if someone does a spell and doesn't pay the right price, the Firebird will come and take that price from you. So it helps keep balance between magic and order in the world. And the other sister is destined to become the queen. She stays with their mother at the palace and learns the ways of court to one day wear the crown. And so that's kind of the setup of the book. And we get to see both girls step into their roles. And both roles are very demanding and kind of requires each of the girls to harden their heart a little. But the one thing they can't let go is their sisterhood. So I thought that was a very sweet kind of thread throughout the book. So we do switch back and forth between the two girls. Every chapter will either stay with the same twin or switch to another one, but they both have such different roles that it's usually very easy to tell which one we're on, even though the chapter doesn't say who we're focusing on. And the narrative voice is always the same, being third person, past tense, where we get some insight into the character's thoughts. I would say even though we're switching between two characters and it's not noted who's speaking each time, it's still very easy to see who's talking. I think that this narrative style would be fine no matter what your reading level. This book touches on a lot of different moral issues, but I would say the one that's the most prominent, as I kind of spoke about in the brief overview, both of the girls have to kind of harden their heart and do things that maybe they don't want to do for the good of the kingdom. And so that seems to be the main moral theme that is reinforced throughout the book. But we see a few touches on other ones, like what's right or wrong, and kind of the downfalls of trying to manipulate somebody. But regardless, any moral themes or questions that are posed in this book aren't examined in too mature or complex a way. So romance is definitely prevalent in this book. Both of the sisters find somebody that they have their eye on, but there's a lot going on with the plot, so not really any time for romance. There's a few stolen moments with like cute things that they say to each other or like deep connections, but the only intimate act is a kiss that lasts no longer than like a minute and a half. So things are kept very PG. The violence is a little less acceptable for all audiences. It's just a very prevalent theme throughout the book. The Firebird, when she exacts her price, will sometimes take a limb or even like kill somebody because the price is their heart and you can't really live without that. But the way that it's described in the book, it seems to just kind of be engulfed in flames and then disappear. You don't have to deal with like the gore that would presumably be there if you just remove somebody's arm. I guess because it's done magically, it's not quite as messy. I could totally understand where it'd make somebody uncomfortable reading about somebody's arm just being taken from them. There's other violence though as well. There is a kind of mysterious force working against the girls. There are a few violent encounters with them, and the Firebird rears her head, and the sister who's training to be the Firebird was trained in a lot of different forms of combat, and so she knows how to handle herself just as herself anyway, but also having these magical fire powers also means there's a lot of damage. She also very deeply wounds several people. While the scuffle in the middle of the book, I don't recall being that violent. The confrontation at the end of the book does get pretty violent. One of the sisters is trapped and she breaks skin trying to get her hands out of these handcuffs, but also dislocates. I forget if it's her hand or her shoulder, but that was a little uncomfortable to read about. So I would probably rank this on the higher end of moderate, almost to severe. There's a lot of blood mentioned. I never really felt a shiver of being uncomfortable or anything like that, but it is very present. I would say that it's moderate, teetering towards high levels of violence. Keep that in mind and be kind to yourself if that's a factor that's more important to you whenever you're deciding whether or not to read this book. So I actually don't have a lot to say in the opinionated section. This book was fine. I think the thing that I did get excited about is that the Firebird is apparently a Russian folktale, and there was a heavy Russian influence, and so I love getting to experience cultures other than my own through fantasy reading and seeing those elements mixed into fantasy, which I feel like I know pretty well, and it's almost a second home. And there was definitely a heavy mix of what I believe is Russian influence. Again, I don't know a lot about it, but it very much was not things that I see during my everyday. So that was interesting and fun, but I'm not sure how much of it was just traditionally Russian stuff or had something to do with the folktale. I gathered that a Firebird is, but I couldn't really tell where the folktale ended and the mythos of like this book and this narrative began. But I also want to couch that with, that's what a lot of retellings and reimaginings do. They don't really make it a point to say what's folktale and what's their imaginings. They just kind of expect you to know the story. So that's not a criticism of this book. It's more of a criticism of like my attitude going into it, I guess, or my expectations. But that was really the only standout thing in the book. The characters were fine. The world building was fine. The plot was maybe a little more than fine. I was surprised towards the end. But that might also be because I wasn't really coming up with, oh, here's how I think it's going to end. So maybe I would have always been surprised because I didn't have an ending imagined for it. I really had no idea where it was going to go. The only real criticism I have about this book, and I think this is just my personal preference when it comes to reading, there was almost too much description. Description's great. That's awesome. But every sentence either had like an as if or like for an analogy or just really, really colorful descriptions. And I guess this all just comes back to personal preference, but I am very okay with if you're like surveying a room after you just got done doing something exciting and you're coming back to rest. Perhaps a bowl sitting there is just a bowl, not a vessel delicately cupping a pool of water. It's just a bowl. I feel so bad because I couldn't go in for specifics, and knowing me, it might not even be in there, but I swear I had a moment where I was like, huh? When an analogy about the cold included like a bird or birds fluttering wings or something related to a bird. This book is about the fire bird. It's called These Feathered Flames. Why would you put in an analogy about the cold in a book like that? Related to literally anything else. But I mean, the analogies were always good. It was very creative. It just wasn't my cup of tea. So I guess my too long didn't read would probably be that I wouldn't actively recommend this book. It's fine. It's not bad, but it's not great either. If you're at a loss for things to read, go ahead and put it on your list. But I know, at least personally, my like digital list, not the list of books I have on hand with me, is over 200. So if you were the same and your to read list is very long, put this at the end. Unless you have a real love of Russian tradition or folk tales specifically, then you might want to rank it a little higher. It might be fun to read a fantasy that focuses on that instead of the kind of the London, UK-esque fantasy grounding that's in a lot of popular fantasy. Although I'm very excited that the fantasy realm seems to be branching out from like the Shire and including so many various, and what's the best way to say this? Kind of being focused in so many other traditions. It's not just like vaguely like UK, European kind of. It might be Russian. It might be Chinese, it might be like Arabic, like it could be all these different things. And I love that. I love that for fantasy, and I love that for me kind of getting to grow as an individual and seeing more representation. So that's nice, and this does lend to that. So if that's something you enjoy, it's maybe a little bit more worth reading. But for me, it just felt very average, kind of forgettable. But that was my review of These Feathered Flames by Alexandra Overy. I just want to thank you for stopping by and giving this video a watch, and I hope you're having a great day, and I get to see you again in the next one. Bye for now.